I always believed in quivets, and I still do until I die. I'm a normal 20-year-old female, and I come from Pamitu, Greenland, where the population is a bit over 1,000. So I come from a small town. Basically, it's no bigger than 1 square kilometre and nothing more. Everybody knows each other, and I was friendly with everyone. I had my mum, my dad, and 2 annoying little brothers. The first is 2 years younger than me, and the other is 5 years younger than me. We grew up like any normal family would. We grew up in society, but had limited access to the internet, etc. In the weekends, my family would normally go out hunting. They would try and get seals and fish, and sometimes reindeers. Us, the kids, would normally follow our parents out hunting. Now to the story. This strange experience happened when I was about 12 or 14 years old. One morning in the summer vacation, my parents packed up the necessary stuff that we needed for 2 weeks prior to hunting, food, clothes and stuff like that, and obviously our guns. It was wonderful in the morning. The town I lived in was famous for having foggy weather literally all the time. My mum always trusted me as a young adult in the family. She gave me 100 DKK to go and buy some snacks for the family. I went into the grocery store named Bursanai that lies 5 minutes away from our house. The sunlight was strong and the fog was thick, so I remembered it was very chilly. It was also kind of warm at the same time. I remembered when I got to the kiosk, the register lady noticed me. Since my dad knows everybody and everybody knows me, she greeted me and gave me some really good prices on the snacks. Since I often go there for lots of food, she's always kind to me. I thanked her for being nice to me and paid for the snacks. When I was walking about halfway towards home, my mum called me and said that they're already by the boat and waiting for me and the snacks. So I walked through the park, and about 10 minutes later, I was in my family's boat and we were sailing. Now my family has an Utton SE 6200cc craft with a 1500 Fedra motor. It's a small cabin boat and there was room for approximately 4 people, but 5's alright. I always take a quick nap while we're sailing because I find it very relaxing sleeping in a moving boat. Over an hour later, we arrived at my grandfather's cabin with our hunting rifles and food and whatnot ready. The hunting area's name, as my family calls it, Taskila Kalikwek, which basically means rings of mountains. Now it took another hour to reach the hunting area. It was about 13 PM-ish, and we're not allowed to speak or scream because every time that we enter the area, the reindeers would get spooked, so we just have to be as quiet as we can. Now I was sitting on my stomach in the small room of the boat, colouring my little book, doing my Barbie drawings that my mum bought me for Christmas. My parents were looking for reindeers with their binoculars, close to the river that runs down from the mountain. Now we had to prepare ourselves for the 8-hour walk. It was in a warm tundra environment with lots of thirsty mosquitoes, and around 15 minutes of walking later, my dad told us to split up into 2 groups to explore the hills that were separated into 2, just to see if the other hill has more reindeer than the other. So that's what we did. The first group is me and my dad, and the other was my mum and 2 little brothers. We always carry walkie-talkies so that way we can always communicate with each other from far away. Me and my dad took the left side and my mum and the others took the right side. I carried on me a Marlin Model 917 V-Bolt action rifle which belonged to my mum. In Greenland, it's illegal to hand over a gun or rifle to a teenager that's not 18, though we kids have been taught to never ever use a gun towards people unless we're told to. And it is necessary to teach youngsters how to use a gun, in case your family is in danger by a polar bear or Arctic foxes that carry rabies. Being this isolated does carry its dangers that normal people wouldn't think of, especially if you're lost out in this tundra nature environment. It can be very dangerous, especially if you're lost by yourself. Now we were careful to make sure that every step of the way we were not talking to each other. Sooner or later, because of this, we did actually spot a male reindeer with big antlers down some small valley, maybe 4 or 6 meters from the hill that we were on. My dad then made signals to me that I should slowly walk down the valley and try and shoot it in the stomach or heart, and that he will take the right side of the reindeer's position a bit further away from it. So this is what I'd done, and I started to make my way down into the valley. I had to be very careful with the tall trees not to make any sudden movements or sounds. I'm now close to the reindeer, maybe 8 or 10 meters away. I noticed something weird about how it moved though. The back was moving like a wave. It almost looked unrealistic to be a reindeer. I just brushed it off, thinking that I was overreacting. I had my rifle anyway. When I moved my left foot, I accidentally cracked a piece of branch, and instead of the reindeer reacting to the sound, the reindeer's back fell onto the ground for a few seconds after it. I thought it was weird, since this kind of reaction was not normal, only to find a reindeer skull that still had skin on it. I remembered that it looked really old judged by the condition of the skin. I panicked as I remembered that quivets can lure and abduct teens in just this way by pretending to be animals. I was really scared. I knew that I was in a dangerous situation and the only solution was for me to get the hell out of there and to run for my life. My father was a bit further away now and I said to him that I was going to be going back to the boat because I didn't feel well. He said that my mum and little brothers were at the boat and asked me why. I didn't bother telling my dad what was wrong because I knew it would scare him knowing that a quivet was nearby. I looked over my shoulder as often as I could to make sure that I wasn't being followed. It didn't follow me, luckily. I wasn't too worried about my dad because he's strong and can handle a fight if he needs to. I must have had to run for a good hour or so before I got back. I don't remember the rest of it. But when I got back, I never told my parents any of what happened. I've only told my closest friends now. Even to this day, they still don't know. It sends chills down my spine every time thinking of this. Even if it's just some loner who's living off the land and seals out there who's lost his mind, it still puts me at a lot of danger. While prospecting out in the Cthulhu region, I come across a set of rock piles known as Chinese piles out in the middle of nowhere. These being here means that somebody did a lot of digging back in the old days, so I started working. And after half an hour, I had about 10 grams of gold and was having a happy dance when I noticed the small standing stones on each of the rock wells. Each of the stones actually had several Chinese characters written on them, and in a moment of dread, I realised that these were graves. I put the gold in the glass in a bottle I found nearby and left it behind. I took down a couple of drawings of the symbols I had seen to go and tell the local historian, who later confirmed my suspicion that yes, these were graves and they probably hadn't been seen in about 150 years. Now, Chinese miners believed that if a miner died on site, the ground would become cursed by the fallen spirit, so they would not continue to mine the area and would tell everybody they met that the area was worked out. Sometimes they would also do extra work to make the site look finished off so people wouldn't end up digging up their graves. I've been back several times, but I won't dig there out of respect. The site's super creepy in morning fog. You can almost see outlines of people in the area. It's really creepy. One of the great stories that my boss told me was that apparently he was involved with some sketchy folk from Prince Georgia back in the 70s, and he was with them while they went out looking for some miner gear to steal so they could just go and claim jump on a site a few kilometers down the road. My boss went down this forgotten old path and there was a clearing which had 2 ancient bulldozers and a small cabin. The rest of the guys went to go and investigate the bulldozers. My boss decided to go and see what was in the cabin, and he found a skeleton that was lying on the bed. There was a bullet hole that was going through his skull. They brought in the cops and they figured that the guy had actually been there since 1935, which was the date on the newspapers. Me and my father used to always go out camping together. However, that changed one day. Now this happened when I was a lot younger than I am now, but I remember it so vividly. One summer's evening, we were camping out near a lake. We'd spent the whole day doing fun things together, my favourite of which was fishing. Just as we were about to go off to sleep, my father woke me and said that we needed to go and make sure we put out the small fire we had by the lake. My dad was always paranoid that it would set fire to other stuff and put us at risk, so we set off in the middle of the night going over to where the lake is. I also worried that I'd left one of my fishing things there and I needed to go and collect. Now we walked only 3 minutes to get over there. As we got there, the light was still going from the fire, but nothing else was there. I was certain that I'd left some of my fishing gear there, and I was disappointed to see that it wasn't. That meant that I'd surely lost it. As I was going through all of this in my head, my dad was collecting water to go and put the fire out, and within a few seconds he had it out. We then started walking back towards our tent. As we got there, something felt off. It almost felt like there was somebody behind us watching us. We looked back and we swear that we could have both seen somebody watching us, but within that second, who or whatever it was seemed to vanish. My dad did look a little concerned. I asked him if he'd seen it too, and he said that he hadn't seen anything. We then turned back to get to our campsite. Now it's important to note that there was no wind at the time, and all we could hear was the sound of the crickets. No animals, nothing else. That was actually a good thing because it meant there was nothing to disturb them, meaning that we truly were alone. However, as we got back to our campsite, the whole place had been absolutely destroyed. Our tent was in tatters, things had looked like they'd been burnt, and there were so many things missing. The scariest part is there was absolutely no boot prints or tracks around it, no noise whatsoever. It was literally like everything changed in the blink of an eye from that one moment we went towards the lake and back. Then I remembered the figure that I thought I'd seen by the lake. My dad threw me over his shoulder and started jogging towards where our car was. Now it was a good 20-minute jog for him to reach the car. I remembered he was constantly looking over his shoulder and reassuring me that everything was going to be alright. He had his gun drawn and I was pretty scared at this point. I could have sworn that I heard things behind us. My dad didn't even bother looking back. We eventually got back to the car and he said not to mention this to my mum and that this would be the last time that we went out camping alone. And it was. Just a few weeks ago, we made our way to a very remote alley that is very difficult to access. Think walking on 1-inch ledges, dropping into narrow crevasses, etc. The valley ends in a short drop with a waterfall that's about 100 foot high. We're almost at the drop when we heard a whistle. It sounded quite a lot like a hiking whistle, but we had only ever seen one other group of people the entire day. They had stopped way before we did as they thought the mountain slope was not even possible. According to our calculations, the group should have left long ago and headed back to the base camp, so it made no sense. Then we heard another whistle. We yelled out hello and immediately got the whistle back. The whistle was coming up from high in the trees on a very steep slope up in the mountains encircling the valley. The slope was like 80 degrees though. The only way we could make it up there would be if we were literally pulling ourselves up by tree branches and whatnot. It was just too steep to go up normally. Just as we were debating whether the whistle was indeed a hiker's whistle, suddenly a helicopter rose straight from behind the waterfall. It gone right above us. They turned around and flew away. It was an unmarked helicopter and the nearest airfield is like 100 miles away. Now we figured that it must have been on a search mission for somebody, so that must have been a hiker's whistle. However, it was strange that the person would whistle repeatedly but never yell back. We yelled again. Whistle come back. Suddenly, we heard the helicopter again. Not 3 or 4 minutes later, we saw the helicopter rise above the valley again, hover for about 30 seconds and fly over the mountain. We went ahead and crossed a creek to climb up the mountain slope. We scrambled up, grabbed onto the roots and branches. The whistling stopped. We yelled back a few times and got no response. Now it took us a good 4 hours to get out of there. The bushes were so thick that at times we walked on branches above the ground and I could not see my hand in front of me. I still have no idea who was whistling. It was a very mechanical whistle. To this day, I still have literally no idea what all of that was about. Deer hunting, north of Atlanta. I headed to WMA in northern Georgia. I had only a short time to scout the area, but I had a basic inexperienced plan to go in early and follow a game trail to where it looked like it crossed a river. My plan was to get there nice and early and sit up and wait until the deer began to move. I arrived at around 4 AM and got my basic gear loaded and began my hike, and the game trail was just ahead of me. There was no light on it except for my headlamp. When I eventually got to where a few game trails converged near the river, I looked for cover and found an old rocky formation with lots of bushes and whatnot. I found that this was the exact place that I needed. After about 90 minutes it was legal hunting hours. I continued to wait, but as the daylight got brighter, I noticed a lot of things around me. I was working as a lineman at the time, and I noticed a yellow tape stapled down to the ground and on a few different places. The area was very wet, and to be honest it made it very hard to see the yellow tape as it was covered in dirt. It was similar to the tape that we used to keep people out of hazardous areas. By about 7:45, I hadn't seen a single sign of any deer movement whatsoever. As I got up, I realised where I was sitting. It appeared to be a small stone area that was built for a hut or cabin of some type. The ground had a thin slab and the stone was piled up making walls. I then walked up to the nearby road that was about 100 foot away from where I was sitting. When I got to the road, I saw a display of colourful objects. I walked over to the display and it was a 3-foot by 4-foot pile of stuffed animals. Now by this point in time, it had been raining on and off all week and the stuffed toys were literally soaking wet. They were covered in splashes of dirt and mud. It looked really horrifying, to be honest. Affixated to a tree above was more stuffed animals and a barely legible sign that was streaking in the rain. It was a memorial for a child that had been murdered in the woods. My mind then raced as I realised the tape on the ground was that of a crime scene, meaning that where I was probably the exact location that the body was found. This is another off-the-grid cabin, middle of nowhere story. Even more secluded because this is my friend's property. He owns about 9 square miles of untouched land near Ward, CO, where we are, or at least should be, the only people for miles. Now there's probably a couple of dozen of us, and this is in mid-November. The original plan was to camp in tents around a bonfire, but it quickly became more of a blizzard situation with low visibility, high winds and frostbite levels of coldness. This leaves us in a cabin that's maybe 600 square feet to get messed up and pass out. Now sometime during the middle of the night, everybody's quieting down and I need a cigarette and to pee, so I stumble, pretty wasted, in my coat and boots and throw on several hats. I go outside, the wind is blowing a bit and the moonlight makes everything coated in ice and snow shine like diamonds. I light my smoke and walk about 20 feet into the woods to go and pee. Now something that every single Colorado child knows by heart is the frostbite wind chill chart. And the fact that the weather is fresh freezes in 25 minutes is hard to forget. So midstream, I hear somebody or something about 20 or 30 feet out in the woods. Though it sounds like a human voice, the wind makes it hard to hear and the snow and dark make it impossible to see anything. I then wiggle my smoke out and with all the courage I can muster yell out, "Anyone here?" Still pissing in a river. It takes not a second for me to hear a reply, "Over here," in a voice that sounds exactly like my best friend's, the kid who owns a cabin. "You okay?" I call out. I get nothing, so I zip up and go and trudge further to make sure that he's okay. Just as I'm stubbing out my smoke though, I hear my name called much louder and clearer from the cabin. I then yell back that I'm alright while walking back towards the cabin. And who's waiting for me at the door? The very kid that I swear I just heard in the woods. I told him I heard something. He trusted me enough to humour me by doing a head count. Nobody's missing. I was able to forget about it and fall asleep pretty quickly in the nice warm cabin. I would have hated to be sleeping in a tent or something. I've always got to wonder though, what would have happened had I ventured further out to go and investigate? A couple of years ago, my older brother and I bought a large piece of land out in the middle of nowhere, about 30 miles or so from even cell phone reception. It's quiet, there's no light pollution, no paved roads and not a lot of people there. Shortly after he bought the place, 2 of my brothers, the landowner and me, and some of our family spent a few weeks camping out on the land doing our best to clear it up. People had actually used it as a dump. There were many downed trees, etc. On the second night of camping there, I remembered that I was awoken with the urge to pee, so I got up and went towards the bushes. I realised that I could faintly hear music. This didn't strike me as odd because I knew my brother had a radio in his camper. I didn't think too much of the matter and just finished up and went to sleep. The next morning at breakfast, I mentioned the radio and music. Several other people recalled waking up at night and hearing music, but no 2 people heard the same song. Finally, my brother who brought the radio woke up. I asked him if he heard music and it seemed to freak him out a bit. He woke up sometime during the night and went outside to smoke. He also heard the music as well and assumed it was somebody else. I should mention that we're the only people with a generator and a radio. It wasn't the radio that we heard. It wasn't anybody else either. We're sure of it. We could see for miles around and there was literally nobody.